The very first time the word worship was ever mentioned in scripture was in Genesis 22, verse 5. The concept itself was initially discussed or talked about in Genesis chapter 4. This was when, Cain and Abel offered up sacrifice to the Lord, which can also be counted for, or which can also be counted as worship. And then we understand that God rejected Cain's worship and accepted that of Abel's. That was when the concept was mentioned. But the very first time the word worship itself was mentioned was in Genesis chapter 22, verse 5. And it says, "And Abraham said unto his young men, Abide ye here with us, and then the lad will go yonder and worship and come again to ye." And the principle of the law of first mention states that if a word or a doctrine is mentioned first in any part of the Bible, that's the foundational premise, or that's the foundational pattern through which it should be explained. Not in all cases. The law of first principle doesn't work in all cases, but in this case, it does apply because it was the very first time the word itself was ever mentioned when Abraham was going to offer up Isaac to the Lord. So it means that if the first time worship was mentioned was when Abraham was going to offer up sacrifice to the Lord, was when Abraham was going to offer up Isaac as worship, as a sacrifice to the Lord, the first thing to note about worship is that worship is offered unto God. That sounds very mundane, but many times we do not like worship because we don't like the songs being sung, and I'll get to that shortly. So worship is offered unto God, not unto man. And if worship is offered unto God, it means that God should also be the judge of worship. So if worship is offered unto God, it means that God can also reject or accept worship. The same way Cain's worship was rejected and Abel's worship was accepted. So God is the judge of worship, and then God can also accept or reject worship. So it doesn't mean, so if worship is offered to God, does it mean that whenever we say we do not enjoy worship, does that mean that we're probably saying we didn't like the person playing the keyboard? If worship is offered to God, does it mean that whenever we say we didn't enjoy worship, what we actually mean is that we didn't like the fact that they didn't sing our songs. We didn't like the fact that they didn't sing our preferred songs. We didn't like the arrangement of the person singing. Are we indirectly saying that we don't like the person singing? Pretty much. Does it mean that whenever we don't enjoy worship, it has everything to do with carnality? That means something material, carnal, because we don't like something or like the person or like the arrangement. Because it's not offered to us. How are we determining? How do we determine whether or not worship was good? Give you an example. If your food is served to someone else and not you, how can you tell whether or not the food is good? So worship in this case is the food. If the food is offered to God, how are you able to tell whether or not worship was good? Again, if food is served to someone else and you didn't taste it and it wasn't served or offered to you, how can you tell whether it was good, sweet, or not? Because you must understand that the only way, the only evidence of true worship is that God leaves us with a token, and that's His presence. The only way we can truly tell, because again, bear in mind, we can't tell if worship was good or not in the singing or in the arrangement, because it wasn't offered to us. The only way we know that worship was good is that God leaves us with a token, and that's His presence. Because understand, the only way Abraham's worship was accepted was when the Lord came and said to Abraham, "Do not touch the lad." And Abraham said, "For God Himself has provided for Himself a ram," which means every single time we worship and is acceptable before God, the evidence of that is that He leaves us with His presence. That is the only way to determine worship. We don't determine worship by the songs we sing. We don't determine what. In fact, so Scripture says in Acts of Apostles chapter 12, I believe, verse 2, it says that as they ministered to the Lord spoke, separate me, Paul and Barnabas. It means that the true feeling of worship, the true proof, the real proof of worship is God's presence. If we don't encounter God's presence in worship, then we've never truly worshiped. Because the proof of that is that there is always an exchange. Again, we'll go with the law first mentioned. Abraham was going to worship Isaac, and there was an exchange of Isaac for the ram, by God saying to him, do not touch the lad. Here's the point. You must understand that first of all, worship is offered unto God. Secondly, God is solely the judge of worship. And lastly, thirdly, we cannot determine worship. We cannot determine whether or not worship was good. And lastly, God is solely the judge of worship. Lastly, God, the ultimate proof of worship, is the presence of God. Not the songs, not the keyboardist, not the leader. Because many times when we say we do not like worship, what we're saying is that we don't know the language of the songs being sung. We are afraid, we don't like the fact that the song being sung was not ours. The true evidence of worship is the presence of God.